It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Judy Gottesman. Your maiden name was Fiedlander, and we're here in a beautiful apartment in Jerusalem, but you live in America, but you were actually born in Hungary.
Yes, I was.
And you're a Holocaust survivor.
Yes, I am.
So, Judy, could you tell us a little bit about your family and how your family managed to survive the Shoah?
Yes, I was 5.5 years old when the winds of war hit Hungary, and my memory before the war are very sketchy. I remember little things like grandmother taking me to kindergarten, and the house itself and my grandmother, grandfather, but very little beyond. Why was I living with my grandparents? Because my father was taken away to labor camp, and I did have a little sister. Actually, she was 1.5 years older. Her name was Goldie, beautiful little girl, and we were not rich. We had to survive, and the only way for that to happen was for my mother to find work, which was very, 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 very seldom that a mother of two should go to work, let alone a Jewish mother. But work my mother had to find, and she did, but the only way she was able to work was to send my sister to my grandparents, to my father's side, and send me to her parents, my grandparents from, my mother's parents. So we lived like that for a while when the war hit us.
And which town were you born in?
Okay. I was born in a small town called Kishkun Maisha. Not such a small town, maybe 10,000 people, but the countryside town where my grandparents lived were very far apart. My sister lived in a town called Kemech, and I lived with my grandparents in a town called Yas Alsho Senjur. I know it's a little hard to pronounce, but that's what it was.
And Judy, do you know the date that you were born?
I was born May 29, 1938. When I was born, my mother expected me before I was born on May 15, but I did not come till May 29. And within these 2 weeks, there was a lovely elderly lady who lived in the same town, Kishkun Maisha, who was very fond of my mother and my mother fond of her. And she passed away between these 2 dates, May 15 and May 29. So her name was Chaya, and in honor of her, my mother gave me the name Chaya Reichel. Reichel after her grandmother, and Chaya from this lovely lady who helped her settle in that town at that point. So I contribute the fact that I'm here today and tell you the story to the fact that my mother gave me the name Chaya Reichel rather than just Reichel. That's 1000% in my mind. We can see how much is a name. Even more so because unfortunately my sister Goldie never made it. When the Germans entered Hungary in March 1944, the grandmother, Blimela, she said that at times like these, a child's place is with the mother. And she was able to secure a Gentile woman who took it upon her to take me to Budapest under the guise of the night. They dressed me up as a peasant little girl with all the ruffled skirts and red shoes, and they gave me a peasant little girl's name. And I remember that ride. We left Jászol Sosendgyőr to Budapest. She took me to my mother, and then she turned back and went back home. However, when my sister Goldie was in Kemech, somehow a grandchild wasn't so, didn't seem to be such a big responsibility, because there were a lot of children around my grandmother. Daughter lived next to her, or a son next to her, and then a nephew, or maybe the neighbor. It was like hive, which means like a court, and there were children playing all the time outside. They didn't think of sending my sister to my mother right away. Of course, we didn't have cell phones and instant news. And by the time my mother sent somebody for her, it was too late. They would never let her go. So, unfortunately, she was marched into Auschwitz with my grandmother, creating a big hole in my heart for the rest of my life. When I was taken back to my mother to Budapest, that didn't mean we're going to survive, but at least we had a chance. I have a story, I don't know how to say this, to say it here or not, that everything happens for a reason. We had to move into a very small apartment because Jews had to leave their homes and move into apartment houses that were marked with the Star of David. And usually it was smaller apartment, more families together. And there was a cousin, my mother, and 4 children in a tiny apartment. But when the 2 women went out shopping, they didn't come home. So us children were left alone. And the neighbors went into panic. What's going to happen with these children? 2, 4, 5, and 12-year-old. Maybe I should say this is the story, the beginning of my survival. Should I? Okay, so what was the last sentence I did in there?
You were at home.
No, I was at home with my mother in Budapest. Okay, we had to move into. Okay, I don't remember the time. I know it was already springtime, kind of, because we were dressed lightly. Okay. After I was taken to Budapest and reunited with my mother, we also had to move from our original apartment to an apartment house that was designated with a Star of David. All the Jews had to leave their mostly lovely homes and move 2, 3, even 4 families together. So we were 2 families, 2 mothers and 4 children in a tiny, tiny little apartment. And one day the 2 ladies went out to shop. We had to eat and they didn't come home. And we were 4 children, a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old me, and 12-year-old boy. The other children were the children of the other lady. So the mothers didn't come home, and there were 4 children left to their own devices. The neighbors went into a panic. What's going to happen with these children? In the apartment house lived a young Jewish doctor. I can't remember his name. I remember his person, his being, but I don't remember his name. He worked for the Red Cross, and they approached him and asked him if he could take these 4 children into the Red Cross. But he was a very young doctor, probably didn't have the authority to make such decisions. But the next day he came back and he said, yes, they will take the 4 children. So all 4 children were moved into the Red Cross, the Swiss Red Cross. Now, my mother, she was young, 30 years old, she was very feisty, and she escaped. They were already arrested. The 2 ladies were arrested, that's why I didn't come home. But my mother escaped. Unfortunately, the other lady didn't have the guts, wasn't meant to be, not sure, she never came home. But my mother came back and she saw the apartment, no children, went into a panic, but they told her what happened to us. She came to visit us, and wisely she decided to leave us there. What would she do with 4 children? It was war. Jews were not welcome to live. So she left us there, and most of the part we were in the Red Cross. I remember a little, not too much. There were a lot of children. We slept across the bed like 4 or 5 children. Sometimes we had food enough, sometimes we just had bread. One time we had to move from one place to the other, but I don't remember where. And there were only other people, not just Jews, but mostly Jews, and there were children. We had a playground to play, but hunger was always around the corner.
Judy, can I ask, was this Red Cross, was it near the glass house of Carl Litz?
No, this was in Buda. Budapest is made up from Buda and Pest, and this was in Buda, not the glass house. Has nothing to do with the glass house.
And do you remember when you were reunited with your mother?
Of course.
When you came back to Budapest and you met your mother,
No.
you remember?
When Budapest was mercilessly bombed, and Budapest boasts beautiful bridges, 5, 6, 7, I lost count because new ones have come and old ones went. When they started to bomb the bridges, my mother was afraid she's never going to see us again because we were in Buda and she was in Pest. So she came one day, and there was only 2 of us left in that home. The 2-year-old unfortunately never made it, and the 12-year-old was spirited away by Israelis. I mean, there was no Israel yet, but Jewish young man to Palestine, whom I later met, and he was very happy here. In any case, my mother took the 2 little girls, and she had somebody she thought maybe would take us in. See, this other family, the mother was married before and had 2 older children, and then she married someone else who was a cousin to my father and had the 2 younger children. So the older children's father used to come visit the children, and my mother knew him well. He was not in the army for whatever reason. He may have had some kind of injuries, or he may not even be Jewish, I'm not sure. And my mother took us to him. He had a girlfriend at the time, to take us in. At that time, everybody lived in bunkers. This was like in October 1944. Around that time, I'm not 100% sure. So the girlfriend, she was very smart. She said, if I'm going to take in 2 little girls and a woman, they will know right away that I'm harboring Jews. So we would all be in trouble, because harboring Jews was punished by death. And she said maybe she can take in the other girl, could say that she was her boyfriend's daughter, but she offered us her apartment. Nobody lived in the apartments anymore. Everybody lived in shelters. So can you imagine, I'm sure you can all imagine what it may be to live at month's end in a shelter. In any case, we took the offer because we had no place else to go. But after the first or second night, we knew that we can't stay here. It was a decent apartment, and one night my mother and I woke up for the siren, and we huddled in one corner, and a bomb sliced through the apartment in another corner. But it didn't go off, otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? Well, we saw the danger, so we had to move out. And through somebody that my mother knew, we found a gentleman who must have been a high-ranking officer at one time. And we pleaded with him he should take us in. And lo and behold, he did. And when we moved into, he had a private bunker. And when we moved in, we saw that there were already other Jews. Just one more lady, actually. One or two, I'm not sure. So he was a guy who understood humanity, I suppose. And we survived there 3 months, November, December, January. As I said, I was young, little. I slept on 4 chairs, 4, 5. My mother slept on the floor. The other lady slept on a couch. So somehow we managed. But hunger was constant. I have no idea what we ate. We couldn't go out. Food couldn't be made in the bunker, cooked or anything. Until liberation, well, I didn't leave the place. And my constant companion was hunger. And I tell you something, after 82 years, my bones are still hungry. It's something that never leaves me. I have to know where my next meal comes from. But thank God the war was over, and somehow we survived. I am living with some bad memories that I wish I wouldn't. And they're constant ones, like the pain of losing my sister, pain of losing my father and all his love and teachings and caring.
Judy, can I ask you, when you were with your mother, did she know that your sister was taken away and she's not coming back?
Well, she knew that she was taken away, but the German tried to make us believe that the Jews are just being replaced and work for the cause. Eventually, I mean, the Jews just didn't know what's happening to them. A lot of the people in the world, they knew, but the Jews didn't know what's going to happen. Once they got there, it was already too late, of course. But when my mother found out that she was never going to see my sister again, I do not remember. I cannot. We were so busy just to survive. Maybe we hoped that what they were saying, that they're working, is okay, because you don't want to think the worst. But eventually, of course, we found out that all these people, the young, the old, right away on the first day they died.
And your grandparents on both sides?
My grandparents on both sides, many of my nieces, the young ones especially with little children, without questions, they died that same day. I had some sisters from my father, young one, between 20 and 30, but even less, that they were able to survive. They came back. And they told us stories, but that took a while. My mother lost 5 siblings. Of course, they never told tales. 2 brothers survived. And with these 2 brothers, we went back to the homestead where my mother comes from, where she was born and she raised. Because in Budapest, the house that we used to live was completely demolished. There was no place to live there. So we went back to this small town, Jászol St. György, because we hoped and prayed that my father is coming back. And if he would come back, he wouldn't find us in Budapest, he would probably come to the small town and find us there. But unfortunately, he never came home either. And eventually my mother got married again. She was young. But the pain of losing your father, your sister, or at least for me, gets worse with each year instead of fading. As you grow older and you try to understand, which you really can't, but you try at least, it's worse and worse.
And Judy,
But listen, life has to go on. We have to put one foot in front of the others, and we can mourn our loved ones. On the other hand, we can celebrate their lives and the love and teaching that they gave us as long as they were with us. Otherwise, you can't accept it. Otherwise, there is no...
And Judy, you came from a very traditional religious family?
Yes, I came from a traditional... Yes, we kept all the laws, the kosher, the clothing. Yes, it wasn't Hasidic. Hungary wasn't Hasidic at all at that time. I mean, I don't remember seeing anyone with a strammel. Beard, yes, but not... To my knowledge, listen, I was young, didn't understand a lot of things. There was no Hasidism, at least not in Budapest.
And can I ask, what is your earliest memories that you have growing up? Your earliest
Growing
memories?
up or the war or connected?
Before the war even, do you have your earliest memories of where your home?
Unfortunately, I remember very little. I remember that I lived with my grandparents for a while, and that's where I started my kindergarten, which is kind of late to remember, because I know people, or even my youngest daughter, she remembers things when she was 2-3 years old. I can't say that I do, but I remember the day my grandmother took me to kindergarten, and I remember the days when she used to bathe me. We had a special tub put on chairs, and that was like a big event.
Was it a Jewish kindergarten?
No. Yaso Shosenjer, where my grandparents lived, and I spent quite a bit of time there, is a town of 5,000 people. There were about 26, 27 Jewish family, mostly traditional. No, there was no school. There was a cheder for boys after school, but everybody had a school to the regular school building. No, there was no special Jewish school, just there was a cheder where young boys went to learn after school.
And do you remember going to the shul in the town that you were with your father or with your
I
parents?
remember the shul. Since I was young, I'm not so sure I went to shul. I remember like holidays maybe we went. It happened to be a nice shul, as far as a shul in a small town that was separate for men and women. The shul stayed intact for quite a number of years after the war, but I believe like the last 25 years or so, it was demolished and new building was built on its place. Yeah, it was a lovely shul. This town really had a good relationship between Jews and non-Jews, even during the war. But there is always a rotten apple somewhere. So the Jews were taken away, just like in any other place. I have two fond memory. I'm not sure fun or fun. I'm not sure. I remember that only the very rich had newspapers. Radio, I don't remember, but in the mornings a town crier used to come to the center on the town and used to say, "Hear ye, hear ye," and read all the news, and when the Germans came, announced all the rules and regulations that we had to follow.
And this you remember?
This I remember. Also, I remember that in the middle of the square, the town square, there was a well that was running artesian water day and night, and we had to go with pails and water carriers, stand in line, fill up our wear and schlep it back home. for cooking, for bathing, for washing. Well, washing sometimes we got the rain, but it was not always reliable.
And what type of work did your father do?
My father was a melamed. He was a teacher. He was very young when he got married. He went to yeshiva. And he was 20 years old when he got married, so. And then bad times came shortly. He liked to learn languages, that I remember. My mother did not speak much of him. Not much. To my regrets, I asked questions many times, but and the sisters and brothers who survived, they didn't know much about him either, because he was in yeshivas and they were younger. He got married and left the house early. But those who knew him only gave me good good things about him. He was friendly, good sense of humor, and
can I
such
ask,
things, yes.
when the liberation, the day of the liberation, do you remember that day?
I remember.
When the war ended?
Yeah, there was a little drama, to say the least. Since we had no place to go, we didn't rush out of that private bunker. We had no place to go. And the Russians were already in town, and 2 Russian soldiers came into our bunker. See, the bunker is built like this. When you come in, there is like a long corridor, so to speak. The middle is the heating apparatus, and then the families are huddled against the wall. But our shelter was at the end of this long hallway or whatever, a private, because this man who sheltered us must have had a high-ranking job in the army, or I think he was retired already. And as soon as that part of Budapest, because not all of it was freed at the same time, was freed, people ran back up to their homes, whoever had a home to run to. So 2 Russian soldiers came in. I don't know how they found us, but they found us at the very end of the bunker. And they sat down and started to eat. But after they finished the food, they were looking for something. Since we don't speak Russian, we didn't know what they were looking for. But it turned out that they were looking for alcohol. Where did we have alcohol from? They didn't have alcohol, didn't have food. And 2 dramatic things happened that I remember. They saw the elderly gentleman, who was our host actually, he was in bed. He had white hair sticking up, not like hair that you comb. They started a match and wanted to burn his hair. For whatever reason, I have no idea. And we were scared to death. What are they doing? Putting this place on fire? But somehow they stopped. Then they saw my mother's suitcase. We had a little suitcase we lived from. They started to throw things out. They couldn't find it. Then they looked at my mother and saw that she is still young. So they were ready to do their nasty things. But then somehow my mother said in Russian that I am Jewish, я сам еврей, and they disappeared. So she was saved, I was saved, the gentleman was saved, but then we saw that we cannot stay here, so the next day we left. We went back to Yasser Shosenjer by foot, by hitch, by truck. Couldn't travel, there was no regular services, buses or trains or cars. Who had cars? There was horse and buggies who gave us a little ride.
And it was just you and your mother?
And see, one of my uncle was in the glass house. They didn't know about each other. But as soon as Budapest was liberated and they came up from the bunker, my mother, I told you she was very gutsy, she was one of the first one, and she bumped into a relative, and he said, "Don't you know, I am with your brother?" We were practically across from Vadász utca, and we were in a publishing house, one of the major newspaper publishing house. And so they found each other, and they looked at the apartment where we used to live, no way. And then we trudged back home, which is about 100 kilometers from Budapest. And then they were trying to make I remember when we stepped into the kitchen from the old house where I used to spend time with my grandmother, there was nothing, just a broken chair, nothing. You have the stove was connected, so they couldn't take it.
Was there anybody had taken over the house, or was it empty?
The house was not taken over. As I understand it, the Jews themselves bought most of their belongings to the shul. But when we came home earlier than people from Auschwitz, because we only came from Budapest. People who were deported, they had come home from Poland, so it took them longer. We were one of the first ones. I do have to say that the people were nice in the
neighbors.
Yes, some people may have taken things, but then they were afraid that maybe my mother will see it by them. So on their own accord, most of the thing was given back. And then we tried to make a living.
And do you remember that, because in a lot of places when Jews came back, the neighbors were not nice. It was the opposite.
Right, because, you know why? Because they took their residences. And they
wouldn't give it back.
And they wouldn't give it back, or didn't want to give it back. Yes, a lot of places. I mean, I don't know personally how many, because I was little at the time, but it was documented, and there was a movie, excellent movie called 1945.
It's in black and white, incredible.
I don't know yet, but I'll take your word for it. But that showed, and we heard, like, I have a friend, they practically had an estate before the war, and the government took everything. They left them one room, maybe, I mean, I was a mother, father, and a child, just barely enough. They should have where to put their heads down, and they left them one cow. And that's how they were expected to live. But that was already communism, so which one was worse? Of course, for the Jews, Nazis were much worse, but
how was the atmosphere when you came back? It must have been so depressing that...
There were some people who were really very nice. They were. There were some people not so maybe, but the town itself, I told you, the Jews who lived there, they were respected. They were not mocked or called Jude or something. Who knows if they loved us or didn't, because mostly they don't love us, but they did respect us. So my mother and my uncle, another uncle came back, thank God. So from 8, 3 of them survived. And one uncle managed a little garden. We had water from the town, and my mother and the other uncle, they tried to bring back a store. My grandparents sold material, and my grandmother sold it. It's mostly for women, and she sold it. It was not like a booming business, mind you, just enough to put food on the table. And my mother and my uncle tried to revive that little bit of business, and we managed. It wasn't easy, but listen, I was 6, went to school. There was no Jewish school in the whole of the Eastern Bloc of Europe. I was still lucky because we had a Jewish high school. I mean, not in Poland, not in Czechoslovakia, no Jewish school. For some reason, the Russians let us have a high school. It had nothing to do with religion. The only thing was that we didn't have to go to school on Shabbos and Yom Tovim. But there was no curriculum for religion. Also, the main, the most important thing is that the company you keep. So we were with other Jewish children who survived the war.
And when you went back to school, how were your classmates? Did you make friends with the other children, the non-Jewish children?
The first 4 years, I went to school in Yasser Shosenju because we stayed there. We were waiting for my father to come home. We didn't learn of his disappearance, or actually his demise, till 1948. So I started school. I was lucky. We had like maybe from February to June. That's like 4 or 5 months. Finished the first class. I was just that age.
Were there other Jewish children in your class?
Not in the class, the whole town. I was the only Jewish kid. Because some people, some remnants of the families came home, but they saw that there is nothing for them to do. No parents, no sibling in most cases, or nothing, no houses. You see, small towns were not really bombed. We found the house intact. But no parnasa, no shul, no minyan, no nothing. We only stayed because we were still hoping that my father was going to come. But for 4 years, I was the only Jewish child in that small town, and a lot of credit goes to my mother and my uncle that they installed in me the difference and the importance of being Jewish. Like, I had to have friends. I was not allowed to eat there. I was not allowed to do certain things with them.
But you made friends with the non-Jewish children?
Of course. A child needs friends. You can, and you go to school with them.
Did you feel any anti-Jewish feeling or any?
For these people, as I told you, the people were in the town. They had very good relations with the Jews. Not everywhere. So I'm not saying that it always that this happened in all towns and everywhere. In our case, it was a very good relation. I am not saying there were no anti-Semites, but as a rule, we were respected and basically left alone. Yes.
Did anybody, the teachers or any of the children, ask you what had happened during the war,
I am sure that my mother was not in Auschwitz. There was a woman who came back from Auschwitz, and she used to tell us stories. But she left. Like I told you, there was no future for a Jew in that town. And my uncle had a friend who came back from Auschwitz. But that was also a special case, very special case. So, but right away books came out, right away books. I remember still living in that town, in that apartment, in that house, when the first book came out, because I was a child, I made sure I'm not seeing all the skeletons and the aftermath of the war.
And can I ask, did your mother and your uncle, did they make the Chagim, and did you have Pesach? What happened on Shabbat?
Yes, Shabbat definitely. We kept Shabbat. A sheikh came back from that town at first, but when he realized that he lost his family of 10 children, he went literary and nuts. So for the time we had a sheikh. Did we eat a lot of chicken? No, but we did some. And I don't remember if there was a sheikh who came by The winter wasn't a problem because we could go to Budapest. My mother went anyway to buy stuff. You can buy a chicken and make it kosher at home or whatever, but we didn't have a lot of chicken. We had some goose, some chicken, beef. Never had beef. It wasn't like here you go to a store and you buy what you need. You had to make everything by yourself, from falafel to butter and cheese or whatever.
And did they re-establish a kehillah? Did they have for...
Not in these small towns, no.
And
they never, even bigger towns, they never, no.
What happened on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and the Chagim?
In a small town, we just davened at home, that's all. But Budapest had a beautiful kehillah, and they kept services, the Rebbe and Chazon.
And did you go with your mother to Budapest?
We did not go for a Yom Tov. It was, like I said, 100 kilometers, but okay, who had a car? First we had to take a carriage to a nearby town that had a station. We didn't even have a station. If my uncles ever went to Budapest for Yom Tov, I can't remember, but that doesn't mean that they didn't. I have no recollection that they would go. Maybe there was another kind of a small city. May have been some Jews who came home and started trades, businesses. But if there was a kehillah, I don't know. No, we just davened at home.
And for Pesach, did you manage to get matzah?
Okay, the first Pesach, we went to my father's family, Kemech. The younger brothers, a few of them made it, 4 brothers. Some of them came from Auschwitz, some of them were hiding. And 3 girls, again, some came from Auschwitz, some came... One of my aunt was blonde, blue eyes, beautiful, so she was able to hide as a goiter. They made what did we eat? Potatoes and matzah and potatoes. Some eggs. It wasn't like today you go in the store and you have everything on earth. My uncle made matzah alone. Maybe later on they bought it from Budapest. I'm not sure. It was not in my work.
And did you have any other cousins that had survived, or any?
I tell you the truth that from my mother's family, I was the only child who survived the war. And from my father's family, there was 2 of us. I and boy, he was either 2 or 3 years older than I. And that was, if Hashem wanted someone to live, he was my father, his father was my father's older brother. Not that, but he was older one. He was married, lived in Kerestur, and had a family. And the older boy named Duvet, he was maybe, like I said, 7 or 8, 2 or 3 years older than I. He got sick. And he had to bring him to Budapest to a hospital. And while the father and the child was in Budapest, and him in the hospital and the father taking care of him, being with him, his family was taken away. The wife and the younger children. And of course, they never came back. So this uncle survived in Budapest, and the young men do it when they see what's happening, so they didn't go back. Being in Budapest didn't guarantee you survival, I told you before, but at least you had a chance. So I don't know exact circumstances how, but they survived. So it was just him, David, and I from my father's family, children I mean. The youngest was an uncle of mine. He was maybe 16 or 17. But as children, I consider myself at 5. child, and there were the 8, 9, we were the only. But for my mother's family, I was the only one.
And were you close with David? Did you?
We were in a way, but then they left. They came to Israel, and he became very, very Hasidic. But there was a bond. There was definitely a bond between us, a big one, tremendous bond. Eventually, we got married. Had 16 children. But when he was 9, and I was 7 or 6, he wanted to marry me.
That's amazing.
Can you imagine me having 16 children?
And Judy,
Yeah, he survived, yeah. But
so what a miracle that because he was sick and his father took him to Budapest.
He was sick.
That's how he survived. It's all min hashamayim.
That's it. He wanted him to survive. He was a very, very nice guy. He was very, very Hasidic. I can't say I'm close, but I'm, in a way, yes, to his family. Can I know how the 16 children? I can go to all the weddings, can go to all the symbols. My son is very good with, I have a son and 2 daughters, and my son is very good with the boys. Like, I have a good relationship with them, but to be really close, can I know I have my family taken care of.
And Judy, can I ask, it's a hard question, but when did your mother realize that your father wasn't coming back?
Okay, it must have been in 1940, about 2 years after the war. I started saying Yisker when I was 8 years old. So my mother was, initially after everybody looked terrible. But initially my mother was beautiful, vivacious, gutsy. A lot of men wanted to marry her, but she had to be careful because she had a little girl. And sometimes I don't know if I was a package or was I a cherished gift.
That's the second option, for sure.
Maybe sometimes this and maybe sometimes that, I'm not sure. But then my mother got married to a very, very, very nice man. He himself lost 4 children and a wife to the war. And we got along very, very well, and I can only say the best and the nicest things about him.
What was his name?
Nevertheless, Fiedlander. He couldn't have the fact that I wasn't his daughter, and I couldn't have the fact that he was not my father. So, but we never had any friction, never had. And as second marriages goes, my mother's was good one, I have to say.
And how old were you when your mother remarried?
10 and a half, 10.
And this was still in Hungary?
Of course, we stayed in, and then we moved back to Budapest. My stepfather had an apartment, which was a big, big, big thing after the war. House shortage was terrible in Budapest. It was a very small apartment, 1 room, kitchen, not a big kitchen, toilet separately, and a bathroom separately. That's it for all 3 of us.
Judy, can I ask you, when your mother decided to get remarried, did she ask you how did you feel, or did you go to the wedding at all, or?
No, I couldn't go to the wedding, but before she married again, she took me to meet him once. But it wasn't like you go in a cafe and sit down and have a cup of coffee and chat and ask questions, and just for him to see me, I suppose, and for me to see him. Things were different.
Was it very difficult for you that your mother was going to be remarried?
I'm going to be very honest with you, no, because I don't remember my father too much. He was in the yeshiva, he was in the forced labor. I was not at home a lot of time. I have one live picture in front of me. I do have a picture, and only one. And also the 40 years between the war end and my mother's new marriage. In a young girl's mind, that fades a lot of things that you don't see every day. So I do have a friend that she were in the same situation, and she had a much, 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 much harder time to accept her mother being married again, because she's half a year older and she remembered her father much more. For some reason they were together more. Maybe he was hiding. I'm not sure. She had a very hard time. No, I didn't have a hard time. I'm honest with you. I didn't.
And was he kind to you? He was.
Yes, never a loud word. Sometimes he had to go to bed for me. I was in sports, not just before high school, like 7th, 8th grade. I was in sports, and to excel, you have to go for training. And every time I left the house, my mother was upset. Again you go. She didn't understand that you can't get to. You can't achieve anything without working for it. And sometimes he used to tell her, why are you bothering her? She's a good girl. She's going to accomplish something. She's not going on the street doing nothing, which I didn't. And I want to tell you something. Sports taught me a lot of things in my life.
And when you went to Budapest,
yeah,
you went to school?
Yeah, just regular.
A non-Jewish school?
First we had a Jewish school till 1948, 49. Yeah, I was in 5th grade, and then the Russians took over and no more. We all had to go to the school nearest us.
Do you remember the name of the Jewish school?
It was just called the Dobutsa. That's the address. Dobutsa, that's like Rechov, the instrument. I don't know what you call it in English. Of course I know what it calls in English, it just can't, my computer doesn't come up. When you're in a band and the instrument that makes the loudest noise.
Maybe a bass?
Not a bass. I don't know if it's a percussion or not. The big round thing, and you hear it. You use it by march when you're marching.
And a banjo. But can I ask, where did you stay in Budapest when you came, with your mother and your stepfather?
Oh.
Were you in the Jewish area?
Budapest had a lot of Jews. We were not in the real Jewish area, but where we lived there were also Jews, just not the real McCoy. But it was no distance.
Do you remember the name of the street you stayed in?
Where we lived? Yeah, it's called Dezsefjutca.
And in which area?
You ever been to Budapest? Okay, so you know the Körút, it goes from the river to the river, near Erzsébet Körút, not far from, you know where the octagon is? The octagon is where there is 8. Oct is like 8, right? There's 8 streets, 4 major streets and then 4 smaller streets. From there, less than 5 minutes walking distance. A good neighborhood. It was a very good neighborhood.
And did you have a shul that you went to?
For every day there was a shul, actually down the block, a little further. You know where Nagy Mező utca is, where all the theaters and everything. So here was Nagy Mező, and here we lived, and the shul was here.
Do you remember the name of the shul?
Dezsefjutca. It was a I don't know if you call it a shul or
Beit Midrash. Like a bit of a Beit Midrash.
It was more than. It had services on Yom Tovim too, but every day the local people from there they went.
And you went there for the Yomim Noraim?
The what?
For the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur?
No, then we went to Kazinski.
You went to the Kazinski?
Yes. and my mother wouldn't have it.
And you could walk to the Kaczynski?
Yes, no problem. Kaczynski from us, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Well, we were a little younger then, you know. Yes, we went to the big shul, to the Kaczynski, yes.
And you remember inside the shul?
Of course I remember.
And do you remember who the Rav was at the time? If they had...
No. No, I don't remember any robes. I don't remember even the chazans. No. I remember that for Shvuyas it was decorated absolutely beautiful. Mostly blue and white carnations. Absolutely beautiful. That I remember. And once we moved back to Budapest, you know, our life was different, a new father, a new place, no status, so to speak.
Did you make any friends? Did you have a lot of friends?
Course,
and there were Jewish
of
friends and
course.
non-Jewish friends?
There were Jewish and non-Jewish. I had to go to a school with, not just, I mean, mostly Goyim, but like I said, in Budapest there was a lot of Jews. I went to school after the Jewish school was closed down, next street. I don't remember how many we were in a class, but usually there is 24 or 28. I mean, here I know it's only 22. I mean, here in New York. There was maybe 10 Jewish kids, but only 3 Shomer Shabbos. And some of the Jewish kids, we didn't know that they were Jews because communists didn't believe in religion, which had a good side. There was no anti-Semitism on the surface. You can't just throw away anti-Semitism if it's in your heart. But if the government doesn't support you, you have to keep it in check. So that was a good thing. You couldn't yell dirty Jew or Jew.
And did the teachers know that you were Jewish?
Yes, of course.
And you never felt any anti-Jewish feeling?
No, not really. Our principal was a very young Rotzer. I can't say he was anti-Semitic, he was communist. I believe he found the whole thing maybe komisch, that he's such a young man. He's the principal of this big school. It was a regular school. I don't know, 200 children maybe.
And Judy, did you ever go to the Neurolog shul, to the Dahani shul? Or
The Dohan shul?
did you ever go
Yes,
inside?
I don't go, we never went there to daven, but I was there since they rebuilt it. It's
But did you have any
absolutely beautiful.
Neurolog friends? Any friends that were more not so religious?
Not from the Dohan shul. First of all, that was a little further away from us. And most of my friends, you see, that was a very good thing. We had to go to public school. There was no Jewish school at the time. But we had after school for us Jewish children. So what did that mean? We were able to do our homework there. We were together with our own kind. We still had time to play games. And we used to daven mincha. That's just about the reflection of the religion that we daven mincha. And but those of us were mostly Shomer Shabbos, mostly Shomer Shabbos. So that what kept us really together.
And you could have kosher food? It wasn't under communist?
First of all, we didn't have any food in these after-school places, maybe biscuits or something, but not food.
But at home?
At home, yes, there was a kosher butcher store, and we had Gans, but the Gans, I think, came from the smaller town. We had chicken, we had Gans, we had Kalbfleisch, beef. We hardly, it was just not because of religion, because we, in Europe, somehow we didn't, at that time we didn't eat steak or stuff like that.
And Judy, did your parents, your mother and your stepfather, did they speak about the Shoah? Or were they friends? Was the topic...
See, my stepfather was in a camp. he did not speak much about it. And my mother was hiding in Budapest. She did not talk about it as such. I mean, she mentioned it here and there. You think when I was here that was easy, or you think how much scared I was when I had to do, but she never talked about it as a whole. But my husband did. My mother not so much, because she was not in the camp. She was hiding.
And with your friends, did you speak about it with your friends?
You know, and no. All of us had a story, but at age 10, between age 10 and 18 till we left, it was not a topic of amongst us. I don't know why, but it just was not.
You never asked your friends how they survived, what they did during the war?
Your best friend, you know more or less how they survived, but other than your best friend, I cannot tell you anybody that I would know besides my best friend. How they no, it was not. It only started to come up after we got married. We realized how lucky we are, and the grown-ups, and what our parents went through, or grandparents. In most cases, we did not. I mean, we all missed. I used to talk about how my grandfather loved me unconditionally, and I still miss his love. No. First of all, we were a minority group. It's not like you go someplace and you talk about it. Okay, when we were amongst ourselves, no. We may have talked about segments, like I may have told people that I remember being hungry all the time, but we never expanded on why, how, why that's the most emotional thing that stayed with me. No. It all started when we started to realize, if that's the right word, what happened to us as children. Yes, I missed my sister, but not in a way that I later on missed her.
And Judy, did you ever go back to the town that you were born in?
I went back to the town where I was born in, and I was looking for this lady whose name is part of my name, but it was unfortunate. The cemetery itself was not so much in disarray, but when she died, they must have had already better headstones. All the headstones were stolen. So I couldn't really find her grave. There were headstones that were put up maybe before the 1920s, I don't know, when they turned into dust. They were all standing there, but the headstones from 38, not one. You could see the humps where the mace is buried, so what did I do? I just lit a candle and said a prayer in her name. But
when did you go back?
When? I would say about 8 years ago or so. You know, I was not one to go to cemeteries, but then I have a cousin, and his father lived with us. We lived together. I mean, he was my mother's brother, and he lives here in Jerusalem. Actually, he called before, and he knew that we lived together at one point. Unfortunately, he died before he was 60. And so when the son, he wanted to know every little thing about his father that I remembered. I was the only link, because my mother wasn't here anymore. And so I went with him to the cemeteries, and since then I go to cemeteries. But before that, I really didn't go. So I forgot the original question. If I go back?
Yeah. Now, when you went back, but with your mother, did you go back at all?
With my mother, we did not go to cemeteries.
But did you go back to your town with your mother?
With my mother, no. I went back with my husband. I went back with my husband. Once we went to Auschwitz, we went to all these places, but we didn't want our vacation to end on a sad note, so we spent some days in Budapest. I mean, I was there till I was 18 years old. We did go to a cemetery.
But can I ask Judy, with your mother, you didn't want to see maybe part of your house was still there, or you had belongings from when you were still, before you had left Hungary with your mother, you never decided to take...
The Russians took everything. There was no such thing as something is yours. Yes, the rents were very cheap, but to find an apartment was almost impossible. Nobody owned anything. Under the Russians, it was everything government owned. Later on, much later on, the Hungarians did some restitution, but very minor. Like my stepfather, he used to be a rich man before the war. He had a house, like a vacation house, but somebody lived there. And then the Russians took it. I think he got $1,000 for very minor, very little restitution. There was not a large scale. My mother also got something for my father and my sister. I got nothing from them. Actually, now we have this section too, which comes very handy, I have to say.
And Judy, you mentioned that sports was very important.
Very.
What type of sports did you play?
I was a gymnast. I had a lot of medals, gold, silver, what's the other one?
Bronze?
Bronze. I had, at first my mother used to put it in the vitrine. We had a vitrine with a small window, not like this. And then she had no more room, then she started putting it on the wall. And when I left, I only left with a beach bag. I didn't take any. So I'm just relying on some people who knew me at that time. They can test. They can be witnesses. Yes, I did win a lot of medals. It was citywide. Maybe elementary wasn't citywide, but in high school it was citywide. So I was very much into it. But you can't get to Carnegie Hall without exercise. So that reminds me that I sang in Carnegie Hall. We gotta put a little comedy in here. I worked in public school the last few years of my working career in New York, and fifth graders have a lot of perks. We go places, and in Carnegie Hall there was a program comparing Beethoven and Mahler, and the old pro and newer one. There was not a regular show, they were fixing the place. And I think Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is the only one that has words to sing. So they encourage the children to sing. So I sang along with them. Doesn't that mean that I sang it?
It's for sure. And Judy, can I ask, why did your, I know they wanted to most probably always leave because of communism, but how did you manage to leave Hungary?
Semmes Borak made this revolution just
that was
for
in 56,
us,
in
1956, just for us to escape. There were some anti-communists who were in jail, there were some anti-communists who were outside, and they staged this revolution. And for a few days, the Russians didn't react.
Do you remember the revolution?
Yes,
do you remember
yes.
the tanks?
I remember the tanks. First, the Hungarians, of course, the university students, they brought down all the when you erect
statues.
Thank you. All the statues of these communist leaders. There was no traveling. They turned over the trams, and they took over the radio station, and what else I'm not so sure. So there was a riot, and they professed that Russians go out, and they will go out. We don't have any freedom of speech, we don't have any freedom of press, no freedom of religion. Actually, we had freedom of nothing. So for a few days, the Russians just let them have their ways, I mean the Hungarians. But then, from October 7th to October 23rd to November 1 is like 8 days, yeah? When we didn't expect it, they marched back on a Sunday morning on the rainy, dreary days. So everything had to be restored to their own wanting. However, I am not sure that during those 8 days, or it was already in the works before, the mines were picked up from the border. Russia didn't want anyone to leave the country. So the border to Austria, it was basically the only escape route, because the other countries, like Romania, they were communist. But Austria luckily stayed neutral or west. So the mines was laid down around the border. You could escape, but you risked your life in more than one ways. They could catch you or you could die. So these revolutionaries who were outside of jail, they picked up those mines. So they were probably planning this, open the jails and have the non-communists, the old, I don't know if they were not Nazis, but they were anti-Russians. They would flee the country. So by the time we realized that it's better for us to leave as well, there were no mines and we could really escape on foot. There were no highways. I mean, the way I left was on a truck from Budapest to a border town. Actually, a friend of mine, not a Jewish girl, I went to school with her. It just so happened we lived in the same house. Her uncles came from a border town to see how their family is doing during this revolution. So, and then when they went home, the uncle, he mentioned he could take some people. And my friend, ex-classmate, but we were friends, even though she wasn't Jewish, she comes and she says, Jutka, how would you like to go to Austria? Huh? The next morning, we had to be at a certain building, and he said we should buy a case of vodka. So we get on the truck. It was an open truck, and it was November, freezing. And we give the vodka to the driver. Not to the driver, there was a driver and there was this uncle. Because Budapest, to leave Budapest, you had to go through a lot of checkpoints. So, I called up a few friends. We were 7 in one group. 7 of us were going to Austria. Not my mother, not my stepfather, my friend, her brother, her fiance, and another couple. So at the first checkpoint, the brother, my friend's uncle, gives a vodka to the Russian. At the same time, he takes a little slug from another. Then at the other checkpoint, the guy gives another bottle of vodka to the other Russian, and he waves us on, and then he takes a this went, I don't know how many bottles there are in the case, 10 or 12, I'm not sure. So each time he gave the Russians a bottle of vodka. So by the time we got to the town, he was dead drunk. But there were so many people already on the truck, luckily, because it was so cold, so at least we kept each other a little warmer. So finally we come to this border town, and the guy who was supposed to take care of us, he's that drunk. But luckily he had a brother who lived in that town too, and I told him that I'm the friend of his niece. He let us sleep in his bed. I had another cousin with me, a younger one, a girl. So we were the only one, I think, who slept But he was very nice. He let everybody sleep on the floor. He gave boiled wine to everybody to warm them up. It was freezing. But food, everybody had to eat what they had. He didn't have enough food for so many people. We were like 27. But my cousin and I, we were sleeping on a bed. But the next morning, 5 o'clock, we had to move on. And we went from 5 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the afternoon on fields that are...
You had to walk?
We had to walk. And have you ever walked on fields that are, you know, underneath is produced like, you know how they go, valleys and mountains. That was a bit hard, even at 18. That was pretty difficult, but Baruch Hashem, we got to the other side. There was a little brook that separated Hungary from, at that point, separated from Hungary to Austria. And there were volunteers. I remember 2 men in a little boat who took young people or ladies mostly over the water, so at least we didn't have to get wet in November. And then there was a process. We got to Vienna. They gave us papers, and they instructed us where to go. Somebody wanted to go to Israel, mostly everybody wanted to go to America. But Israel was the easiest. As soon as you signed up to go to Israel, they got in contact with you, gave you a few dollars to buy something. Most everybody came without anything. And within a week, practically, they took you. But those who wanted to go to America was a long wait. Canada didn't make you wait because they were taking you in with open arms. I don't know who went to other places. South America also took people in. Who else? I mean, I was there only 2 weeks.
And where did you want to go?
Switzerland. Rita's grandfather was my mother's uncle. So that was the destination. And there was somebody, I spoke to the uncle, and he told me to look up someone, and he would help me to get papers to get into Switzerland, 1, 2, 3. And that's what happened. But when I came to Switzerland and I started working, the grandfather, Mr. Schlesinger, said, make papers for your parents also to come. Once you work, they could let you do that. And I did that, and they got papers, and then my mother came to visit the uncle. And the uncle said, "Was darfst du gehen auf America? You speak Yiddish? Come here to Zurich. This will dance in America." And then my mother decided to listen to him, and instead of America, come to Zurich. So.
And Judy, when you came to Switzerland, how was the reunion with your family in Switzerland?
Well, the only one I could talk to was the uncle, because he spoke Hungarian. Everybody else spoke German except me. It was difficult. It was hard. I was home. I was homesick. My mother wasn't here. I mean, I was a grown-up at 18, but we lived a very sheltered life. Everything that was ever discovered or was good for the world, it came from Russia. That's what they tried to teach us. So I really looked like a foolish young woman. Also, when you don't speak the language and you can't express yourself.
You could only speak Hungarian.
And a little Russian.
And Yiddish? Did you know any Yiddish?
No.
You never spoke of it at home?
It's not that we were hiding our Jewishness, because we were recognizable Jews. My mother always covered her hair, but we did not flaunt that we are Jews. We didn't call each other on Jewish names. No, I didn't speak Yiddish. My mother did, because from the olden time. But when I lived in Switzerland, actually I learned a little German, and later on that German turned into a little bit of a Yiddish.
When you came to Switzerland, you stayed with your uncle?
I stayed with my uncle, and then my mother came and my stepfather. And
how soon afterwards did your mother come?
Well, actually, I was here for 4 months, and then my parents got the visas to come to America. They stayed. You know, when a mob acts, then you put on the character of a mob. You don't act on your own. So that's what happened to my mother. Everybody was leaving, so they decided to leave as well. They didn't want to leave at first, but when everybody's going, so you join them and you go. And they were in Vienna. Actually, I was still in Vienna when they were in Vienna, maybe one night, but we didn't know of it. I didn't know that they came. So I was in Switzerland, in Zurich, for about 4 months when my parents got the visa to come to America.
How did they get a visa to America?
When they first came to Vienna, I have to say Vienna handled this immigration situation pretty good. You had to go there, you had to sign up, and I'm sure there were papers to fill out where you want to go. Like I said, to Israel it was very easy. Canada was quite easy. To America you had to wait for. Now my parents wanted to come to Israel too, but my stepfather wasn't so young anymore at that time, and everybody said, life in Israel is very, very hard, you're not going to make a living, go to America. America, everybody makes a living. So they signed up for America, and it took 4 months.
And they were staying in Vienna during that time?
They were still, they got an apartment. I don't think they had to pay rent or anything because they had no income. 4 months they had to wait, and when the papers came, my mother told me I should go back to Vienna, and all together we're going to sail to America. But my mother said she's not leaving Europe before she sees her only uncle. And the only uncle lived in Zurich, Mr. Schlesinger. So my mother came to Switzerland, say hello, goodbye, how are you, to the uncle. And the uncle had Seeberger that come to Switzerland, this is going to be your America. So my mother stayed in Zurich, my stepfather and I packed up what little thing we had, came back. So I came back, I was able to come back because I worked and I paid taxes and I was legal. And the only thing was that I was the only one who worked. My mother didn't work, my stepfather was in a deep depression, he couldn't work. But that was not really the only problem.
What type of work did you do at this time?
At first I was sewing on a sewing machine. And later on it was better, I was ironing. And then later on making little boys' neckties. That was the most horrible. But the last one was good. I did a lot of things. And they appreciated me, but only too late. I was the only one working, and when you get a job as a newbie, they paid me 7 francs for an hour. But they hired somebody at the same time doing the exact same work as I did, a young man, Jewish man, and he got 10 francs an hour. So that I am, even though, you offered me 7, but I'm the only breadwinner. My father doesn't work, my mother doesn't. No, 7 francs, take it or leave it. That's why I took it.
This was in Zurich?
It was in Zurich. And half a year later, my mother didn't want to stay in Zurich. She wanted to go to Canada because one of her brothers went to Canada, had little kids, and they really grew up under my mother's face. So my mother wanted to go to Canada. So gave in the papers. We got the papers to go to Canada, and I gave in my resignation. And they told me, we'll give you 10 francs, just don't go. They didn't want to let me go. It's too late, too little, too late. And then we left, came to Canada, and then a new Pasha. learn the language, learn the customs, learn the culture.
And where in Canada?
Learn 2 languages, because Montreal official language is French and English. So Vossava gehabt mit my German. But we had relatives there who come from a part of Hungary, which is today probably Romania or Russia or Ukraine or something, that their mother tongue was really Yiddish. So if I wanted to talk to them, my German became as a Yiddish Deutsch. But when the radio, the Jewish radio, used to say the news, I understood not one word. So, but I learned a lot of Jewish expressions. How, what, when, I'm not sure, but I do know a lot of Jewish expressions.
And Judy, when you got to Montreal and you met your mother's mishpacha, your family, your mother's part of the family, how was the connection? Were you very close, or did you develop an instant connection?
Well, the only real relation that was one of my uncle's wife, my father's youngest brother who survived the war. He married a woman whose mother tongue was really Yiddish, but she also spoke Czechish and a little Polish, but the mother tongue was. The others were friends or relatives from my mother's sister-in-law, the brother's wife. But they all used to gather together Shabbos afternoon in the house, at my uncle's house, and they mostly spoke Yiddish, so I picked up a little Yiddish. With most of them, I had no relation, except this new aunt that I just met.
And your mother's brother?
No. My father's younger brother, he emigrated to Canada way back in the 46, maybe, 45, 46, 47, I'm not sure. And then he lived in Canada. He was a young man, that time 17, 18, 19, whatever, very religious. He got married, maybe he was 20, 21, to this woman. It was a shadchan. Created marriage, and when we came to Montreal, they lived there already a long time. We only came in 1958, and he lived there already since 1940 something. So this was the only aunt that I had relationship to speak to Yiddish. The other people, they were related to my uncle's wife, so I didn't really have much to do with them, but I heard them talk and I picked up. When you're young, you pick up a language quickly, and I did have a flair, and I always wanted to learn French. And when I was working very hard, I said to myself, when I'm going to be 60, I'm going to buy myself a rocking chair, and I'm going to rock and learn French. But the problem is that the rocking chair is still in the store. But I have somebody who could teach me.
And how long were you in Montreal?
I was there only 15 months, and then I met my husband and I married and went to live in New York.
Your husband was living in Montreal?
No, my husband lived in New York, but I came on vacation to New York and we met. Actually, my husband was my mother's cousin, but we never knew each other. So I needed him to take me to New Jersey. In the meantime, he did take me to New Jersey, but we got married.
So your mother had relatives that had gone to...
In New York, yes. Most of her first cousins who went through the war, because if I think back, most of them were in Auschwitz. They came back to Hungary and they found no parents and no one almost. Somehow Hashem made them get married, and most of them came to New York, most of them.
And when you met those relatives again after all these years, how was when you met your mother's cousins,
yes.
How was the connection?
It was good. I'm a friendly person, and before I left, my mother told me a little about this one. She had like 15 cousins here. I wasn't going to meet all 15 cousins, but she knew whom I'm going to meet, and she said a few words about them. But there was one cousin that I really wanted to meet, and she lived in Jersey. And my husband was the only one who had a car. And I asked him to take me, and he did. And then he wanted to marry me. So.
And your husband was also a
I wasn't
survivor.
so ready, but actually, no. I wasn't sure I want to marry him, but I wanted to get away from home.
And Judy, can I ask, your husband was also a survivor?
My husband was a survivor, but he was in Auschwitz. He was in Auschwitz. Not just in Auschwitz, but in Germany too. Well, his story is much more riveting and more about the Holocaust itself than mine. But I'm going to tell you something which I often tell people, that all the horrible things that happened during the Holocaust and the aftermath, it's mingled with some triumph. My husband was in Auschwitz and then in Germany, and he was befried May 5, when the Germans threw in the towel. He went back to his hometown, and he came to America in 1946 with a group of young people and a rabbi from Nitra. So they named it the Nitra Yeshiva. They came from Nitra. If it was a yeshiva already or became later, that I don't know. But in any case, he came with the Nitra Yeshiva, and they lived out of town, not in New York. Small town. Usually yeshivas, where the boys are really interested in learning, happens outside of a big city, because once in the big city, the learning is not on the books. So in any case, my husband they learned day and night, and he got burnt out, and he wanted to come to the city a half a day to earn some money, and a half a day to learn.
What was the name of the yeshiva?
The Nitra. It's the region where they lived. But that they didn't...
Was he from Slovakia?
When he was born, that region was Slovakia, but then it changed to Hungary, and then it went back to Slovakia.
And did he know Rabbi Weissmandl?
Of course, he was his rabbi. I unfortunately didn't know him. He passed away before I married my husband. I have a beautiful... When he said, you come into my house, there is a few steps, and then you see some walls. I used to have a copy of a famous picture that I made it in, handiwork, and it's a small area, and I put it there. To me, it looked nice, and nobody ever said boo when they came in. Then we got a big, beautiful picture already framed from Rabbi Weissmandl. Anybody came into my house, that was you have a picture from Rabbi Weissmandl? You have a picture? Oh, look, everybody said something. Well, I think it was one of the Dutch, what's the big Dutch painter's name?
Rembrandt. Could it have been Rembrandt?
No.
It doesn't...
Anyway, a lady with a hat, very cute one, and my work was in it because it was a go blind. Nobody said anything. Rabbi, yeah. So I tell you what happened. It has something to do with Rabbi Weissmandl. So when they didn't allow him to go to the city to work for a half a day, my husband picked himself up and came into the city for a whole day. Took an apartment, a room, got a job, got a social security number. So he became known to the United States of America. And it was during the Korean War, and the Americans suffered a lot of casualties. So they took everybody to the army. And my husband said, they asked him what would be his favorite thing to do. He said, take a machine gun and kill all the Germans. Didn't matter. The last thing they measured was his feet. You're in the army. So he had to go to the American Army. But after training, Hashem created an unrest in Germany, and his unit was sent to Germany instead of Korea. And he was a big shot there because he spoke German. He was the translator for the captain because the captain didn't speak over German. But I'm telling you, he was in the army for the U.S. Army for 33 months in Germany. So 6 short years before that, he was a prisoner of war. And now he's an American soldier with a rifle on his shoulder. So we call that victory.
It's amazing. What an incredible story.
And then he came to Switzerland to visit us. I remember.
And Judy, when you met your husband,
Yeah.
was your mother and your stepfather happy with the shidduch?
No. But that's a different story.
But they accepted.
Listen, they agreed, they went along, should I say. Actually, my mother and my husband were cousins, so they allowed themselves a lot of things to go between them that strangers wouldn't. And it was a little bit difficult, but every relationship is difficult. But listen, it was in the past. And
where were you married?
I got married in Montreal, but right after marriage we came to New York because my husband had a job in New York.
And in Montreal there were many survivors as well. There was a very large community of survivors.
There is a large community of survivors, but not nearly anything as in New York. But we mostly associated with people from similar background.
But the chasana.
And I lived there for a short time.
It must have been a wonderful chasana to have a marriage after the Shoah.
It was a simple wedding because we didn't have money and my husband paid for the wedding.
Were you married in the shul?
He didn't have money. No, not a shul, a hall. Regular wedding.
And do you remember the Rav who officiated at the...
No, no. I only lived there. No, actually, my husband bought so wanted to say something important about Rabbi Weissman. No, he bought his rabbi from New York. We were there only like 15 months, so we didn't have an established shul or established anything. But it was a simple wedding. So when my husband was drafted into the army, everybody was upset. He had one brother who survived the war, lived also in Williamsburg, New York. And, my husband was also upset. He didn't want to go to the army, he had no choice. So before he went to the army, he went to Rabbi Weissman, and the rabbi told him, if somebody falls off the 6th floor of a building, he's definitely dead. But if somebody is an athlete and knows how to jump off a 6-story building, he has a chance to survive. So he said, Efshar bisti an athlete. And my husband said that this phrase was in his head all the time when he was in the army, because eventually he didn't keep Shabbos, didn't do any of the mitzvahs, but that always stayed in his head. And when he came home and he wasn't keeping Shabbos, his brother, who was very religious already, I mean, they come from a very religious home. My husband asked him, if I'm not religious, I'm not your brother anymore. And he said, no. The brother said, no, if you're not religious, you're not my brother anymore. So slowly he came back to the fold.
And when you met your husband, he was...
Yeah, he was already Shammai. So if you really want to call it, it's a double mitzvah. He became a bar shiva, so to speak, because he wasn't religious, and then he is a Holocaust survivor.
And Judy, during all this time, your mother and your stepfather and your family remained from? They kept the Ewana?
Yes. They lived in Montreal, and my mother's brother, that we lived together in Hungary for a while, he was a really, truly religious man. He wasn't a Hasidic man, but he was a really, we lived alone as Jews. He davened every morning, he davened in the afternoon, and he davened at night. We were the only Jewish family. But really from the heart. He wasn't just doing something because he had to do it. He did it because he wanted to do it. He remained like that all his life. Yes, and we always kept Shabbos, always ate kosher. Can't say it for everyone. During the communist era, a lot of religious Jewish people, even maybe more religious than us, they had to go to work. Some of them didn't have access to kosher food, but we, Baruch Hashem, were lucky. We were always managed to have kosher food and keep Shabbos.
It's very unique.
You have to take the time and the events that makes it unique. Because here, if somebody Shomer Shabbos and eat kosher, of course, this is the land of Israel. But that was a communist country, didn't believe in religion. People had limited opportunities as far as keeping Shabbos. And they had responsibilities not just toward themselves, but towards others. So to keep the Shabbos and eat the kosher in those circumstances, like everything is relative, as what's his name said. And it wasn't easy. My best friend, her family, just as religious, maybe even more, and her father had to go to work. The father didn't have work, and then they knew someone, and the mother went to beg. They took away the job, and they gave it to my friend's father. So how could he say no? But he had to go to work on Shabbos. They took away, you see, there was no such thing in Hungary as unemployment. Everybody had to work. And if there was not enough work, then they made it so that 3 people would do the work that 1 person could do. So this way there was no unemployment. People made very little money, but if they take away a job from someone and give it to you, you have to take it. There's no such thing as.
And Judy, when you had your children, your mother and your stepfather must have been so happy. They must have been.
Grandparents.
That's the victory. That's the.
Well, I'm sure they were, but by that time, it was kind of an accepted event. Somebody gets married, tries to start a family. My mother wasn't so happy because I didn't have a boy. She wanted me to have a boy and name after my father. But eventually I have a boy that's named after my father. Which is, it's not so simple because any of my Einigel, they can't be named after my father because only my son has married children at the moment, and he's named after my father, so any of his grandchildren cannot be named after my father. But listen, this is what it is. This is what we have to accept, and we have to be thankful for everything Hashem gives us. And I always say we have to be thankful for the things that He does not give us, like punishment, sickness, suffering. We always have to look down. So much better off than so many people and just be satisfied with what we have.
So Judy, I always ask for a message, but this is such an incredible message that you've already given. But what other message do you impart to your family, to the future generation?
Actually, there's two kinds of messages. One, which is for the moment, when we says never again. Unfortunately, this is never again. And as history shows, there will always be a time. Ever since a Jew was created or born or declared, anti-Semitism came with it.
So we say, "B'chol dor v'dor amdu aleinu," in every generation.
So we can't just sit back on our laurels and think that now it's anti-Semitism and finished, the next generation will enjoy anti-Semitism-free world. No such a thing. We have to accept it, fight it as much as we can. Of course, some people have more power, some people less, but this is the time now for never again. But it's not exclusive. It can unfortunately come again and again. So we have to be very vigilant about that. And I'm hoping and praying for a time again when all Jews, Israelis and others could walk proudly on any streets, on any city, any place in the world. But we have to be vigilant because the never again happened throughout the centuries, and I am not a Navi, and I hope it's never going to happen, but I do have another personal message which I just came up on fairly recently, that I do forgive. Like for most of my life, I would not forgive the Egyptians or the Romans or the Greeks or the Spaniards, especially the Germans. But I realized that these countries, these people, they were just tools of Hashem to punish us and make us realize that there's something we're doing wrong and we have to do tshuva.
It's so amazing. It's really, and you can look at the Germans today and...
Yeah, I'm not blaming them as I used to, although I predict that once the last Holocaust survivor dies, Germany is going to go down as well as the rest who did harm to Jews. But until the last one of us is alive, and the money comes handy. I'm not a hypocrite. I will say the money comes handy. But once they will be rid of that responsibility, I think.
Well, Judy, I just want to thank you. I'm just going to come into. First of all, I am so incredibly grateful. Judy, your story and your life is just something extraordinary. It is something, miracles. You have so many miracles in your family, and that you're alive, that you're here.
All of us who's here is through a miracle.
But you're so positive, and that your family, that your mother and your stepfather, that they kept from after what they'd gone through, what they'd lost. It is absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, it didn't come easy, but you know, the upbringing, I would have to, I have a story to tell you, but I don't think that's actually my husband's story.
If you could. And before we tell the story, I want to thank
I'm going to make it short.
Rita. I'd like to thank you as well for the introduction. Oh, please, if you could go ahead with the story. All can I just mention, what you've mentioned today is so precious and so important and so inspirational. I don't know, whoever watches this, their lives won't be the same afterwards, because it is so real, and it's
coming
I'm
from
so grateful to you.
I give it more importance because you have met so many other people.
It's been unbelievable. Let's hear the story. Every word is so precious.
If I made a few minutes It has to do with the war, but of my husband's story, really. Me, I live by morals, and it says that if you cry, you cry alone. If you laugh, the whole world laughs with you. So I want the whole world laugh. Not at me, with me. Right? It's just as easy. Okay, this is a story of my husband. He was 14 and a half years old when he was taken to Auschwitz. But the story begins way before. In 1938, my husband, Kalman, and his family, they had visas to immigrate to America from Czechoslovakia. At the time, the place where they lived was Czechoslovakia. Then, in 1938, the Germans urged the Hungarians to take back territories from Czechoslovakia that they lost during World War I. So sure enough, the Hungarians went in, moved the borders. Till here is Slovakia, and from here it's Hungary again. And where my in-laws lived, my husband and the family lived, became part of Hungary now. So the papers that they had from Czechoslovakia to immigrate to the US became null and void. Of course, they were very upset. They were ready to leave to a new country, a new life. My father-in-law had already 2 siblings in America, and now they can't do it. They have to stay and become Hungarians again. So when 2 boys became 6 and 7, or 7 and 8, I'm not so sure, had to go to school, there was a rule in that region. Franz Joseph made a rule in the 18th century, I believe, that all children under his rule have to go to school at least 6 years. So the 2 older brothers became of that age that they had to go to school. So my husband's family lived in a small town, and they had to go someplace else for school. And my father-in-law took them to Pressburg, which today is Bratislava. At that time, they offered schools, public schools in 3 languages: Hungarian, Czechoslovakian, Slovakian, and German. So my father-in-law didn't want to send the children to Hungarian schools, even though they spoke Hungarian at home, because he was still very angry at the Hungarians for moving the borders and couldn't leave. He wanted to send the kids to a Slovakian school, but it was full. They wouldn't take 2 boys. So he had no choice. He had to put them in a school where they were teaching in German. So fast forward, the 2 children stay in Pressburg. The father found them where to live, where to eat, and they spent 6 years there and studied whatever they needed to do. After that, they came back home and went back to the yeshiva. So this was already very close to the war. And when the Germans, or the local gendarmes, took the family to Auschwitz, they all just went, the big boys and the mother with 5 little kids. In Auschwitz, when you get off the train, you're separated by gender and age. And my husband was 14 and a half. He stayed with the younger brother who was 13. The older brother was 16. He had to stand in another line and then went in different ways. So this story is about my husband, so I will just continue that part. Eventually they were sent into the camps, and just like the rest of them on the camps, they they sit on the floor, they sleep on the floor, and they got meager food. These two boys, 14 and a half, 13 years old, of course they're hungry all the time, and there was not enough food, and the food was horrible. So they decided not to really eat that horrible food, but being hungry forced them to think otherwise. And especially on Friday night, the two boys were reminiscing how it used to be at home on a Friday night. The men and the boys go to shul, and they come home and they sing, and the house smells from challah and fresh chicken soup and cakes and all the goodies. And now here they are, they have nothing. So my husband remembered that he has a tiny siddur saved somewhere, because the German took everything away from you, but somehow he had a tiny bit of a tiny siddur. So said to his brother, you know what, let's say the Parshas Haman. Because when you say Parshas Haman, for that day you have parnasa and then you have food. So the two boys said the Parshas Haman, and they stretched out their hand, and they thought that the man is going to fall from the sky. But of course the man didn't come. So my husband said to his brother, you know what, maybe we left out something. Let's say it again. So they're saying it again, hands stretched out at the end, waiting for the man. No man. Then my husband said to his brother, you know what, let's say it in Hungarian. Maybe we understand it more. We can say it with more kavona. So they say it in Hungarian, maybe with more emotions, and still they stretch out their hands and they wait for the man. No man. So finally they were disappointed and reminisced a little more and fell asleep. The next morning, German man comes into their barracks and he's asking these young men, you know, usually from the same region, they were put together at first, who speaks German. Lots of hands went up because from the region, a lot of young people spoke German, either from the school, from home, from just the neighborhood. And the doctor goes, do. 4 young men. My husband was the 4th one. He says, you come. No, he started to talk to them, and he asked them, how come you speak German? So this one said, from home. How come you speak German? Whatever he said, and so forth. So he asked my husband, how come you speak German? He was only 14 and a half. So it's Volksschule, public school. So he sent all the other 3 boys somewhere else, but he took my husband with him. And then he explained, I am a Jew, and I am a prisoner just like you, but I am a doctor, and I have a job to do, and I need somebody to help me with little mundane things. You come with me. So the doctor took my husband with him to his own room, and then there was another attached room that was for the sake of the Red Cross, and they brought in sick people in the morning, and at night they burned them. And my husband had to keep that room clean and took care of the food, because the Germans, whenever they sent people to these sick rooms, they sent food allowance, whatever meager it was. So, and also my husband had to keep the doctor's room nice and neat. But what happened? He got twice the portion of the regular portions because he worked. The doctor was able to share some of his food because his wife was allowed to send him packages from Germany because she wasn't Jewish. And then he had that sick room and the food that nobody ate, because these people were sick and they couldn't eat anymore. So he was the boss of all over these food, enough for him to eat more, plus smuggle some in for his brother. Unfortunately, his brother didn't make it, but for my husband, it was a big help. Food. If you know anything about Auschwitz, you know that that was one of the biggest problem. People's being hungry, becoming like skeleton. I'm sure you saw all those pictures. So the power of man, and you never know when you learn something, when and how it's going to come handy. So do it.
Such a wonderful, such an amazing story. Such
It
a
is.
lesson.
It's a true story. My husband.
And how many years were you married?
Almost 55. My husband is gone 11 years. Or a little more. Yep.
And Judy,
But you know, my husband used to say, I was there, but I don't believe. I don't believe it that I was. I don't believe the things that they did to us. And I was there. Also, what he spoke a lot about his experiences. He used to say, sat down to eat, I never thought that we're going to have enough to eat and left over. Every time he sat down to eat. Every time he said that. Never thought that we're going to have enough to eat and.
And Judy, did you speak to your children? Did they know?
They know a lot because my husband was very vocal. And in a way I was lucky because a lot of the children, they go, here we go again. No, they were respectful and they listen. That doesn't mean that they know everything.
So
yeah,
Judy, your children, did they ask you questions about the Shoah? It was open, they could ask?
You know, when they will ask questions, when I'm not going to be here, that's when, no, I cannot say. However, I just wanted to mention something regarding children, Holocaust children
second generation.
Holocaust parents. When the Jews were in the Midway for 40 years, they had more than one reason, quite a bit more. But one of the reasons, that you can relate to this story is that when the Jews left Egypt, they were slaves. Their mentality was like slaves. They dressed like slaves. They spoke like slaves. They felt like slaves. They had a job to take in a new country. But how could these people do that? They didn't have the confidence. They didn't have the mentality. It was impossible for them to do it. So their children, the next generation, grew up already under the free sky. So they were able to think like free men. It's true that halfway they were still tied to their parents' stories from the slavery and the lives that they lived. But the other half, they were already free because they weren't in Egypt anymore. Yes, they heard the stories, but it was the parents' story, not theirs. However, when their children were growing up, those children did not hear anymore from the slavery. They heard from their fathers, which was mostly free, and a new way of thinking, a new way of attacking things, or a new way of approaching things, and dress differently, and the thinking, a free man or a man who is literally chained is much, much, much different. So there is not one generation, but two generations had to grow up in order to do the job that they were supposed to do, to take in a new country. And they achieved it only by being free for 40 years, not just 20. So I relate that to our situation. My children, they hear my stories, which is mostly from the Holocaust. Well, maybe not mostly, but my husband's as well. But their children, my grandchildren, they're like much, much, much further from the stories that my husband or I used to tell them, because they're already living in a different free world. just hope that the free world is going to continue, and all our children, grandchildren, going to grow up free men, thinking like free men, and make the right choices.
Thank you so much, Judy. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this.
49 January.
Your mother was married in 49 January.
1949, January 1st, 2nd, something like that. But I was in a home, because she didn't want that I should start a school in the small town, Jászló Szentgyörgy, and then after she got married, then Budapest. And for 1 year I was in a home that's called the Domonkos. I don't know if you heard of it. It was very famous then. And from the Domonkos I went to that school. But unfortunately the next year we had to go in the nearest one in the area.
And you have fond memories from the school?
From Dobutsa 35, not so much, because I spent my last 4 years in a small town. And there's a big difference between the small town of Budapest. But I did make friends. I have no problem talking to other children. And it was okay. It was okay. Yes, I met another few friends. I met a lot of new friends.
So this is the school that you were in Budapest, and the name of the school?
DOB, Dob, Utca 35, 35. Dob means the drum. That's what you need to know. Yeah, this is when we went out. This was my classroom.
And it's in the grounds of the main shul of the...
Yeah, it's you could come in from Dobutsa, or you could come in from Kazinci. They meet, but when I went there, it was called the Dobutsa 35 school.
And how long were you in the school?
And that was 1 year, 1948 and 49.
This is when your husband was in the army.
In the army, and he was off.
And who's in the picture with your husband?
That's Rita.
This is Rita, wow.
And Rita's sisters. Let me see, who is it?
That is amazing. So this is part of your family with your son?
My son. This is his son. And of course, no.
And the grandchildren.
And these are the grandchildren, these little twins. This little boy named after my husband. That's Petite Moa. Okay, there was this family in Belgium, probably 1922, 23, who were a family, a mother, father, and a 7-year-old. They were already on a train that would go to Auschwitz or any of the other camps, when 2 German soldiers came to the train and they approached this family. They needed a maven of diamonds, so they wanted to take him off, but the gentleman said only with his wife and child. So they were probably desperately in need of his knowledge. Told them, okay, let's go. So they took him wherever there's a bunch of diamond was to be appraised, and then somehow he just escaped, him, his wife, and the child, and they made it through the war. And that 7-year-old child is the grandfather of one of my Zigekimen granddaughter. Zigekimen means somebody who's coming to who just came to the family. Lovely.
Incredible
lovely
story.
They already have 5 children.
Canberra.
I have a picture someplace. You want a picture?
This is Yael, and it's her...
Grandfather, the 7-year-old boy, is her grandfather.
And how was the chasana? It must have been so special.
Oh, that's very nice. Very nice, but she's up. Okay, this picture is not the best.
But that's
But
her
I don't
grandfather.
have a better one. Ah, you know what? Here, this is her and me.
That is so special.
Just like I was 5 and I'm the grandmother of the Hassan, the grandfather was 7 and grandfather of the Kala.
It's Nissim. Really miracles.
Really, really.